is if you go and look up the story of the Brown Scapular, the first thing that comes up, and I didn't even know, I was just like started reading through it and I was like, this sounds really weird, and I actually like don't think I agree with this, and I don't know what's going on here, is a order of sisters that are in schism with the church. They're like super,
Mm,
super radically conservative, like don't consider to go against like this, like don't want to submit to the Pope, like totally because they're like so far like traditional.
okay.
And they were like saying some really like to ever to receive any of the promises of the scapular, it needs to be wool. It needs to be worn in the same exact way. Like, I don't know, just all these very like weird conditions around it that just sounded like oh, that sounds like woo-woo magic if that's how you're like the only way to receive this grace or like receive the promises from Our Lady is to be doing this exact thing. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I do think a lot of Catholics still have that misconception because like they go to look it up or like they look and this is the first site that pops up. It's like this big nice site that tells you about it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk About It with Jackie and Megan. Today we're going to talk about, I guess, sort of another Marian apparition, but more so a sacramental, and that is the story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the Brown Scapular.
Yes.
I was like somewhat familiar with the scapular
Okay,
because
yeah.
I think like when we first became friends, it was like a very early conversation we had because I was like, what's that or whatever. So my familiarity with it was very small. Um,
Even what did I even say? I don't even remember.
I don't really either. I just remember like, oh, I think there was a conversation. Like I was like aware I was aware of it when we started like researching for this podcast. I was like, oh
Right.
yeah, yeah, the little like piece of
Cloth.
fabric or whatever, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you were like me and you didn't know much about it, this will be interesting. Or if you do know a lot about it, this could be a fun perspective because obviously I'm coming from a like Protestant Lutheran perspective and you're coming from a Catholic perspective. So we thought we would talk about it because
Sure.
I also think there's a lot of misconceptions about it on both sides, maybe. So
Oh, yeah. Yes.
do you want to maybe break down like kind of the story or like the history behind it or where it like sort of started?
Yeah, so I didn't really know much about it either. Actually, I don't wear one. So that just will sh set you up to show you that it's not necessary. I don't wear one. I did wear one for a brief time as a part of like my household in college, which is like a whole other story, but I don't wear it anymore. I have it, but I don't wear it. Yeah, and I did not know much about it either. It's just like a regular old Catholic in the world. I don't feel like it's something that is like commonplace if you're just like raised as a Catholic, at least in the United States, and it's not something like a lot of people wear.
Because
It
a
was
lot of
in
people wear the
college.
miraculous medal, I feel like.
Yes, and I feel like even then they don't really know like anything about the story or much about
Like
it. It's just
pretty.
kind of like something like Christians wear a cross necklace, we wear miraculous medals, and
Yeah.
sometimes like crosses. I don't know. It's like just another like thing that we will wear.
Hmm.
Um, which that's also fine too, because it's just like a nice visual reminder as well, and they're pretty. So, but I don't think there's a lot of stories known behind them because I am pretty sure, yeah, this is also considered a sacramental,
Huh.
the miraculous medal, but that's another story.
We did
So
talk about that in
we
a
did,
podcast
yeah, we talked
episode,
about the
didn't we?
apparition
Yeah. Hmm.
because yeah, is associated with an apparition, and I went there, which yeah, that was cool in Paris. But this one I feel like is even lesser known, and a lot, you don't really see it because people wear under their clothes too. So people could
Sure.
be wearing it and you don't know they're wearing it. And I have a couple of friends that wear one that I don't really see it unless we go like to the beach or something. I'm like, oh, you wear a
Yeah.
scapular. Yes. So it comes from in the year 1251 in England. Our Lady appeared to Saint Simon Stock, who was a Carmelite, and it goes that she handed him a brown woolen scapular and said, "This shall be a privilege for you and all the Carmelites." So it actually started specifically as just for the order that he was in, and like an answer specifically to his prayer, Saint Simon Stock. Um, that a privilege for you all the Carmelites, that anyone dying in this habit, she called it a habit, shall not suffer eternal fire. And that's kind of why it's brown. It goes with like their habits that they wear, the Carmelites.
So
And then
originally it wasn't just like a scrap, it was the actual like
yeah, I
clothing
think it
part,
was
correct?
bigger. It wasn't just
Yeah.
like this little um yeah, and it went with like their whole vestment. It's not vestments what
Yeah.
you call it, but whatever they wear as a part
Yes.
of their religious order, which I'm not sure exactly what that looked like because I do think that's kind of evolved over time too.
I can
Um
find a picture. But I guess habit would be the right word then, right?
yeah.
If it's
Yeah,
their
so it
their
was a
outfit.
habit. Yeah, and then in time the church extended this privilege to wear the brown scapular to just the laity, and that's probably where the like the little that you can wear under your clothing and like in the way that you wear it, it's like there's one in the front, like a little panel in the front, a panel in the back, and it kind of drapes over your shoulders. Um, and yes, you can wear it, but there's also like you can go through as a lay person, go through like an official like um, what's the called? What's it called? You can join like an order as a lay person of like the Brown Scapular and kind of be a part of it as a lay person. And because you don't have to actually like become a Carmelite.
Sure. Would it be like a
So
consecration or similar?
kinda, yeah, yeah. Funny because there are a lot of misconceptions around the scapular. I think even amongst Catholics, and it's probably these misconceptions Catholics have that also give a lot of Protestants misconceptions because they're spreading misinformation about it. So actually, what's really unfortunate is if you go and look up the story of the brown scapular, the first thing that comes up, and I didn't even know, I was just like started reading through it and I was like, this sounds really weird, and I actually like don't think I agree with this, and I don't know what's going on here is a order of sisters that are in schism with the church. They're like super,
Mm,
super radically conservative, like don't consider to go against like this, like don't want to submit to the Pope, like totally because they're like so far like traditional.
okay.
And they were like saying some really like to ever to receive any of the promises of the scapular, it needs to be wool. It needs to be worn in the same exact way. Like, I don't know, just all these very like weird conditions around it that just sounded like oh, that sounds like woo-woo magic if that's how you're like the only way to receive this grace or like receive the promises from Our Lady is to be doing this exact thing. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I do think a lot of Catholics still have that misconception because like they go to look it up or like they look and this is the first site that pops up. It's like this big nice site that tells you about it. And
I think
yeah, I
that's what
reached out to my priest friend and he was like, get off that site right now. Don't read that.
I think that's what I'd always heard too. It was like, oh, it
Yeah.
had to be wool and it has to be like on your skin and you can't take it off. Like I think a year or so ago there was like a Twitter discourse about this where someone was like, you shouldn't even take it off to shower. And then people were like, you're being way too overly scrupulous about this.
Very scrupulous. Yeah. Yeah, and also like what that's just weird. Because if you once we get into the theology of it, it doesn't have to do with how you're wearing it or like if you take it like that's not really what the point of it or like what a sacramental does. So there shouldn't be these like strict guidelines around it like that. Now, it makes sense that maybe it came from like the Carmelites that they're in a religious order. So part of their religious
Okay.
order is like wearing specific things and in a certain way. Just in general, like they are supposed to wear a certain thing. So there might be more strict guidelines around like a religious order just because of how they represent themselves, what they wear, but that's not really like attached to like the sacramental aspect of it. So I think it could have bled out from that on like to the
Mm.
laity, like you have to do it like this. Um, Whereas that's not really necessary, because that's not how sacramentals work. So I don't think a lot of people even know what the word sacramental or that the scapular is a sacramental. Um,
I was gonna say
so
I
yeah.
wasn't aware of that distinction really. Um, yeah, do you want to break down like what is a sacramental in comparison to like a sacrament? Because I feel like most people have heard of sacrament, but maybe not sacramental.
Yes. So I think there could be some Protestant denominations that acknowledge sacramentals. Um, but I really have only heard about it in a Catholic context. Um, so there are several different types of sacramentals. So actually the most common is just a blessing, like which
Mm.
Protestants also have, which I we can talk about later, the maybe the distinction. And it might even vary from denomination to denomination, but a blessing is considered a sacramental, and that's something that is very common to most Christians. We see it in the Bible. Jesus, as he was going into heaven, extended his hands and gave a blessing to the apostles. And yeah, that's something very common in the Christian life. An exorcism is considered a sacramental. Um, is doing the sign of the cross is considered a sacramental. Holy water, like dipping your hand, doing the sign of the cross,
Mm.
even if you're not using holy water. And then like medals, having relics, even like certain devotions to saints, and then the Brown Scapular. Those are all different types of sacramentals. Um, and sacramentals, so we'll start with sacraments, which we all agree on. Well, we don't actually all agree on sacraments, but we all agree that there are sacraments.
They exist.
Yes, and that Jesus instituted like baptism and certain sacraments. So sacraments in Catholic language extend the logic of the incarnation into the world. And so St. Augustine said that a sacrament is a sign of a sacred thing, making men and women holy. It is a sign that causes grace in the life of the believer. Baptism is the most common, a sign of cleansing and washing. The sign communicates cleansing from sin, and it does what the sign signifies. So, especially in a Lutheran and Catholic context, we think that the water is like actually is cleansing us from sin. And the water is like a sign that we can see of what is happening, a spiritual reality of what is happening. Um, it is a sign. So um, sacraments bring grace into the world ex operato, which means by the very work having been done. And sacramentals almost like dis extend what the sacraments are doing, but they're not actually like dispersing grace in the same way that sacraments are. They are in some way preparing the person, sacramentals prepare the person to receive the grace from sacraments. So for a Catholic, we believe receiving both justifying and sanctifying grace from the sacraments as time goes on. So wearing my scapular is better disposing me to receive the grace from communion, from going like receiving these sacraments that we think Jesus instituted. Confession. Um, yeah, I don't know how that would exactly work in a Protestant context, but like you do believe that you're continually receiving grace, but I think it might be kind of a different way that we think the grace is working. But in anyway, it's disposing us to receive. So this is from the Catechism. Sacramentals do not confer the grace of the Holy Spirit in the way that sacraments do, so they are different. But by the Church's prayer, they prepare us to receive grace and dispose us to cooperate with it. For well disposed members of the faithful, the liturgy of the sacraments and sacramentals sanctifies almost every event of their lives with the divine grace which flows from the paschal mystery of the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. From this source, all sacraments and sacramentals draw their power. There is scarcely any proper use of material things which cannot be thus dedicated toward the sanctification of men and the praise of God. So we have sacraments, and then it's like sacramentals help dispose us better to the grace of those sacraments. And it should be emphasized that they are not sacraments. They cannot replace the grace that sacraments give us, and they should not be raised above the importance of our faith. They're like an additional thing. They are not necessary in any way, which I think is what can be a misconception is like, okay, well, I'm just going to wear the scapular because Our Lady said that we'll be saved if we just wear the scapular. But actually, Saint Simon Stock, who received it, said, "Eh, in conjunction with wearing this is given to like faithful Carmelites. Like you need to be living a Christian life, participating in the sacraments, um, striving for holiness along with wearing it. You can't just wear it and then think you're going to be good. Um, because it should be all in conjunction with living a Christian life, which I think can be, it's not magic. You can't just wear it and then boom, I'll be saved if I die. That's actually a heresy called formalism, that you're just wearing it and you don't really care.
To
And
get
yeah,
out of
because
jail free card.
no, it's not a get out of jail free card. And I actually have never met anyone that was wearing it like that. Most people that are wearing it are like the only reason they know about it is because they're very involved in the faith. They're very faithful. So even if they have weird misconceptions about it, they're also already like regular participating in a Christian life and going to mass and stuff. So, um, yes. And also I think the hinge of what we disagree on as Protestants with specifically the scapular, because other sacramentals I think we would agree more on, like maybe not specifically how they work, but we also can see them in the life of a Protestant scapular. So I think where we disagree is the intercession of Mary. So that would be one thing we want to like get down to what we actually disagree on versus what we just like misconceptions about it. But I think that would be one of the things that hinges on why a Protestant wouldn't wear a scapular, is because it really does remind us. The scapular also reminds us to go to Mary as our intercessor. And that's the same with the miraculous medal. So obviously, Catholics, we have a theology around Mariology, and how she and the saints can be intercessors for us. So yeah, I think Megan, you had brought that up. Like you don't believe in Marian intercession, so you wouldn't wear the scapular.
Yeah, I think I want to also backtrack, because this is something I was thinking about this morning, is maybe an area where Catholics and Protestants talk past each other is like we both use the word grace, but we might mean something slightly different with it. So when you talk about like receiving grace from a sacrament, um,
From
would
just
you say,
sacraments, yeah, going back to sacraments, yeah.
yeah, would you say that, I'm trying to think of how to like describe this, that it's grace enabling salvation or contributing to your salvation? Sort of like how like justification is an ongoing process.
Hmm.
So it's like a gift helping you attain salvation.
I think, yeah, because yes, because we believe, and if you're Catholic, let me know if I'm using the wrong language, but the way that I
Sure.
understand it, and I think also is where our disagreements would come in, is one of the big things is our differences in justification, whereas Protestants have just that one moment of justification, and then the rest of your lives is sanctification.
Hmm.
Like generally, that's how it would go.
Hmm.
Correct, Megan? Catholics, we have that initial justification that you receive in baptism, but then we believe that justification and sanctification are simultaneously happening in your Christian life. Like you are continually being saved. And a part of that is like participating and being in the life of the church because we believe that the church and Jesus are intertwined. He instituted the church. And so our salvation from his sacrifice on the cross is constantly flowing also from him to like the church and the sacraments he instituted through his church and that they are inseparable. Um, so, yes, and we have that we believe justification is ongoing throughout our daily life. Yeah, an important part of being a Catholic and being saved is like continually receiving the sacraments, especially obviously the Eucharist. Um, and that's like continual forgiveness of sins and things like that. So I think that is a difference there too.
Yeah, because I almost wonder like if we could break it into like two categories, like there's sanctifying grace and then sacramental grace, because we would both hold to sanctifying grace, like a gift from God that allows us to participate in his divine life, like in union with Christ, in the stripping away of our sin. And that's something that can be received, I would say, even in like our daily lives, like through like sanctification occurs when we, through the help of God, resist temptation, things like that. And then sacramental grace maybe would be where that difference is of like a gift received through the sacraments, enabling us to attain justification would maybe be like where that difference lies, where that would be what Catholics would hold to, and that would not be how we view. Like we have that sanctifying grace, yes, but maybe not that sacramental grace. Does that make sense?
Mhm. No, I think that's like when I was trying to break down where we actually disagree. I think those were the two main things that really separated us on this was like Mary, but then also, yeah, these differences in our views of what kind of grace like sacramentals can be
Yeah,
giving you, and just like the sacraments in general, since sacramentals are an extension of the sacraments.
sure.
Because I think like Lutherans, and this is just what I would think is like everyone believes in like receiving a blessing or even receiving like, well, maybe not call it exorcism, but like deliverance or something like that. And maybe they would think that's extending sanctifying grace, not something that also is like in conjunction with their ongoing salvation. Because we all have like blessings or things like that. And we see these things in the Bible too. Um, so no one, we can't really argue that like, oh no, there's no blessings after you're baptized. There's no blessings throughout your life, or like there's not, there's no grace. No one thinks would you stop receiving grace after you're baptized. Like,
Right.
I don't, well, maybe there's some people that do, but I feel like most of us would agree that we continually are receiving grace and help from God. I think
Yeah.
that's really our differences on our views of justification can be different.
Yeah, because I would say, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but like Lutherans, for example, would acknowledge the word and sacrament as means of grace, not so much as like a substance being like infused in us, enabling us to like further our justification, but it's like God's declaration of righteousness based on Christ upon us, which is why we really emphasize forgiveness of sins being the main purpose of the sacraments in, like, for example, baptism and the Lord's Supper. It's you're receiving the forgiveness of sins. So the grace in that is that declaration of justification of righteousness on behalf of Christ. So I think that also could maybe show the difference of why we wouldn't have sacramentals in our spiritual life because of that different understanding of grace and justification.
Yeah, at least definitely not in the same way we do. Um, because we would think that they're doing different things. So yeah, I think that's where we would, yeah, where the breakdown would happen,
Mm-hmm.
where the differences actually would be. And that makes a lot of sense because I think like you can argue about sacramentals all you want, but I think it goes back a lot further. There's like a lot of steps before that of like finding, okay, this is actually where we split off because
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a misconception that's like, well, you're just relying on this material thing for your salvation. It's like, well, then no, that's not true.
Right, right,
We
right.
all agree that our salvation comes from, and all of the grace from that comes from Jesus's sacrifice on the cross. We are all saved by Jesus's sacrifice on the cross. There's no other way to get around that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that is. But then as that extends out, like the grace from that sacrifice, how that extends and works in our lives, I think is where we disagree. Um,
Yeah.
so if we can not just accuse the other of like, oh, well, you just believe this or you believe this, because I think that's where it breaks down. And then breaking down those just like, oh, you can just wear this and be saved and you're good and not actually practice your faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, because I think so. I know in like the Lutheran Church, for example, there isn't like a category of sacramentals.
mm.
There's symbolic, like there's symbols, for example, like the crucifix would be a very powerful symbol of Christ's uh, atoning sacrifice for us. We'd make the sign of the cross in during service.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think of like other ones. Nothing is coming to mind, but you get the idea. Like we have those symbols, which we would believe are like visual reminders of Christ's death and resurrection, but not necessarily carrying a promise of grace or like salvific justification or protection in and of themselves
Yeah, right.
necessarily.
Right.
Whereas I think for Catholics, and correct me if I'm wrong, a sacramental object is a means of disposing grace from God to us. Obviously alongside, a proper devotion and faith, and perhaps even a protection in that. Whereas we would see like, no, this can be like a really great visual reminder. This can be, if it's like wearing a crucifix, if that helps you to like feeling it on your skin, helps remind you throughout your day, like Christ died and rose for me, Christ died and rose for me, like that can really like powerfully impact your faith. There could even be sanctification in that because you're reminding yourself daily, but it's not necessarily receiving grace through that object. Does that make
hmm
sense?
hmm Yeah.
And so I think that would be where the difference is. Um, like a symbol of Christ's work versus a devotion and object dispensing grace.
Yeah, and even then, we wouldn't even want to use the language that it's dispensing grace to us, but it is in a way
Okay.
like preparing us better for that grace, and there is actual power in. So yeah, there is a difference there. So I guess we wouldn't even want to say the sacramental is dispensing grace, but there is
Oh,
something
okay.
powerful happening there by wearing it that it's preparing us to receive grace. So
Sure.
yes, I think that Catholics, even so, I think we would still say that there's actual like power with proper devotion, like within the sacramental that would separate us from what Protestants believe about these things. Um, yeah,
Yeah, because even like the Bible, for example, like the Bible is a sacred book because of its message, because it's the word of God, not
right.
like the physical book itself isn't holding like a divine power in it. Um, or like yeah, like a crucifix is a reminder, or like artwork in churches, like stained glass windows depicting scenes from the Bible, and um, that can be powerful reminders of faith that can, prepare our hearts for worship, perhaps, but we're not receiving grace through that.
Hmm.
So I guess so sacramentals are not seen as like a source of receiving grace. That would be just the sacraments.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Um,
what would be the difference then between like me wearing a crucifix and you wearing a scapular? Because there must be a difference.
we do think there's actual power, and somehow it's like
Okay.
disposing us to receive that. It disposes us to cooperate with that grace. So there
Okay.
is something more like happening there than just like a visual reminder for us. Um, So yeah, I think that is there is a difference there with like with that we actually think that it is like it has some power there. Of course, yes, along with like you said, proper devotion, proper disposition toward it. Um
Mm.
so we would say it is drawing some kind of power from the sacraments, but it's just like we're
Okay.
very careful with the language you use because they could never replace the sacraments. Like
Sure.
obviously it's
You
the
can't be like, well, I'm
sacraments
never going to receive
were
the Eucharist because I wear a scapular.
Yeah, and I haven't met anyone like that, but it's probably someone out there like that. Probably maybe. I think that they would I think it's this not really the scapular that people would use because that one is such I feel like not as well known or widespread, and with that come I found people are very very devoted to their faith that actually wear the brown scapular and take that on because it
Oh,
is something you
niche.
wear constantly and it's not like cute looking, honestly. So I feel like you got to be pretty devoted to your faith to like keep wearing that just from like a vanity perspective, I'll be real. Um, yeah, so those people are usually pretty hardcore and like really living a Catholic life.
Sure.
Well, for the most part. You know, there's always the exceptions. But I think other ones that people could misuse are like holy water or I don't even those, it's like I don't find many people that are actually using sacramentals because they don't care enough to even do that. That um use it as an excuse, but maybe like a miraculous medal or something where it's a little more like cultural, but even then I don't feel like they know the promises or like that it's a sacramental. So yeah, the more I think about it, but that's just my lived
Sure.
experience. I'm sure other people have different experiences with that. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because I
not a
think,
get
and I
out of
do
jail.
think some of the confusion can be placed on like the original
Yeah.
message,
Yeah.
um, which, who knows if it's even like interpreted accurately. I don't know. It was like what in the 1200s, but
Yes.
like the promise of like, oh, dying with the scapular, you'll be preserved from eternal flames. It's a sign of salvation, a safeguard, a pledge of peace, and of my special protection. I think that just like listening to that without like an explanation from a Catholic sounds like very superstitious. Like this object is promising Mary's protection over you. So
Right.
I think some of the confusion can even lie with like that original message is that sounds different to me than like what you're saying of like, oh, well, this is like disposing me and preparing my heart to receive the sacraments. It's like, well, that's not what that sounded like, you know? So I think that can be where a lot of the confusion lies and where like a Protestant would be like, no, that sounds very superstitious. That sounds like
Right.
you're placing, you know, faith or assurance in like an object of spiritual power where you know it should just be like a reminder of faith.
Hmm.
um yeah, because I would say like an object doesn't bring grace or protection by themselves, and you wouldn't say that either, but that does kind of sound like what that original message is saying. Do you feel like that or no?
Yes, I if I read that too, I'm like, what? That's not Catholic theology, but I think
Yeah.
that it's been taken out of context a lot, and I think that that's the issue is that this was a specific message given, first of all, to Saint Simon of Stock, who was very fervently praying specifically like to Mary and asking for like help in something like his own story, and she came specifically to him. And this was specifically for the Carmelites. Like this was a very specific thing given. And then over time it like extended to the church. And I don't think the messaging was always correct around what it was, what was being said. Um, because if you read more, even what Simon Stock was saying, or if you read any more around the scapular, it's like you need to be living a Christian life, you need to be a faithful Catholic to be wearing this. Um, and so I think that that has been lost around it. And um, yeah, it's just kind of, I think that's the issue is like reading the message actually in its context. And then also realizing that it's not like clearly in the church, like the fact that it's not widespread, that it's not overly emphasized, honestly, and that most Catholics don't even wear it. Like it's not something you're gonna find in your common Catholic church, like them telling you this. Like clearly this is not like the means to salvation because what do we do for all Christians? We baptize them. We have them receive the sacraments. They go to mass. Like that is your main source of living a Catholic life. Like the Brown Scapular, I think is beautiful. I think that certain people are called to certain devotions that I think like God works in each person specifically to help them get to heaven and to be sanctified and like live a holy Christian life. And I think some could feel a particular calling like to wear the scapular, and I think that that might be what they're supposed to do, but as like an addition to their faith life. But not everyone is. But yeah, if you just read that, it's like, well, damn, why aren't we all wearing the brown scapular? Like, what we doing wrong here? Um,
Right.
but yeah, I think it needs to be in the right context. But I think even Catholics I've talked to, like they don't, I don't know, the way that they talk about it, it's like this is really bad messaging.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
mean, that would be confusing to me even as a Catholic, just hearing that out of context, which I'm sure you even like interacting with like that heretical source. It's like, oh, wait, what?
I know
This
I kept
doesn't
reading
sound
it and
right.
I literally called my priest friend, Father Michael, because I was like, dude, what is this? Like, this can't be what we believe. This is
Wait a
crazy.
second, do I need to be wearing this?
Yeah, I'm like, wait, this can't be what the church teaches. This, and he's like, no. He's like, get off that site right now. You,
Yeah.
because it really was. Even, yeah, if I'm reading it, I'm like, I don't like this. This doesn't sound, yeah. But apparently it's the Sisters of the Carmelites. It's this specific order that has this huge website. It's the first thing that comes up when you search for it, which is so unfortunate because
Mm.
yeah, I found it to be very misleading and very just, I don't know, weird. Um, and even
Especially if
like
it looks and
what,
sounds very Catholic and you're not aware that they're in schism, it can be, yeah, deceptive.
yeah. And I'll just say throughout history, every devotion, like rosaries can be considered sacramentals. Like I said, this can be considered, and you're going to find someone, some even saint, or someone that said, this is the greatest way, like the easiest way to get
Sure.
to heaven, or this is the greatest devotion you can ever have, or if you want assurance, like use this. And oh, it's not necessary. I think if you're living a faithful Catholic life, you're gonna feel like God maybe call you to a certain one that he specifically like registers with you and helps you in your daily life. Because another thing with the scapular and with like miraculous medal is that habitual like, and you kind of said this too, like just the seeing it and wearing it, it builds a habit within you to like pray for the Mary's intercession or ask for grace or whatever. It's like this habitual thing. So I think they are really great. And I think even Catholics and Protestants would agree with that. So that's why I think the scapular can be really helpful because you feel it. It's like it's there, it's large. You don't really get used to the scapular very, I don't feel like when I wore it.
Yeah.
And you can take it off when you shower and such. Like that was a weird thing that like if you ever take it off, like you're done. You're done. It's not gonna work.
Back to the drawing
Or
board.
it has
Start
to be
over.
wool. And that's not true, but I know a lot of Catholics that still even have that misconception. It's funny, even brought it up with some Catholics and they were like, "Oh, I think because they heard that original messaging like around the scapular without context that even I know Catholics that are like, I don't like it. I
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I would say, and it's funny, every time we have these conversations, it's like, oh, we agree more than we disagree. Like having an object as a reminder of faith, or even like one that pushes you to pray more frequently throughout the day, I think is wonderful. Because that's something that we can forget. Like, what I'm going through my daily life, I'm doing dishes, I'm taking care of my kids. Like, am I really praying without ceasing? Like, scripture calls me to. And if there is an object like for example, we have crosses and crucifixes in our home. I have one like in my kitchen that I can see when I'm standing at my sink, and that's like such a great reminder for me when I'm like standing there doing chores most of the day. I can look up and see it, and then it's a reminder. I'm like, oh yes, like there's something larger. Christ died and rose for me, and it causes me to pray, and it sort of brings me back, especially when I don't know, I'm having a rough day and the kitchen's a disaster and I'm like not in the best mood. Like that is a
Yeah.
powerful reminder. And I think we can both agree that that's extremely sanctifying. I think that
Yeah.
like maybe the core of that difference would just be that understanding of grace in relation to justification.
Yeah.
And then, yes, obviously Marian intercession. Like I would not be praying to Mary. Marian stuff is funny, like as I've become Lutheran and interacted with more Lutherans, because there are Lutherans that have, I would say, like more Catholic views of Mary,
Mm.
or it's much closer because it's technically like it's I forget what term they use, but like it's an allowed piety. Like if you want to believe in like the perpetual virginity of Mary as a Lutheran, like that's very much allowed. It would not be dogmatic. Like I can't walk around telling people if you don't believe in the perpetual virginity, you're not truly Lutheran or something like that. But yeah, it is interesting. I would still say there's that distinction though of Marian intercession between Lutherans and Catholics. Like
Mhm.
we would view Mary's role in salvation as complete with the birth of Christ, whereas you see an ongoing role.
Yeah, and I would say in people's individual lives.
Mm,
Yeah, like it's continually drawing from that, the incarnation and the crucifixion. That's where it starts and where it ends. Like that grace was all there, but in each individual lives, like the distribution of that grace continually through, we see like through the sacraments and then, yeah. But yes, I think that, yeah, she continues. That's a good way to look at it. Um, that she can continue to participate in our lives, in our
sure.
salvation, to help distribute that grace. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I do think that's where the miscommunication is because I think, yeah, people talk a lot past each other in these conversations. So as I was reading like your objections and then I was thinking about what the theology is and like reminding myself, I was starting to see, oh, actually, this is where we disagree. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up even like blessings as a way of receiving grace. Because then, yeah, as I was thinking about it this morning, I was like, oh, we, like definitely pastorally, like before we were, officially members of our Lutheran church, we couldn't receive the Eucharist, but we could go up and receive a blessing. Or like I was pregnant at the time, and I would receive a blessing for my baby, which I loved. I loved how pro-life that was too. Like that my baby was also
that's so
receiving a
cute.
blessing by me going up. Yeah. Or if we bring our kids up with
Hmm.
us, because they're in church with us and we have to go up, like they obviously can't take the bread and wine right now, but
Right.
they receive a blessing every time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, what is the difference? Because obviously I could go to a Catholic church and go up and receive a blessing instead of receiving the Eucharist there. So, what's the difference in our understanding? So yeah, I'm glad you even brought that up too, because it's a little more than just like the Marian intercession, I would say. That
Oh
is
yeah.
the sort of the
Yeah.
core of that difference.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I think it's also good to know what types of other sacramentals there are because it kind of helps it make more sense. Like blessings are the main one. I think it's always funny that exorcisms are. Because I guess an exorcism is a kind of blessing. It's just a very
A
specific
big one.
circumstance of someone really needing, really needing. And like as you can see, like that, it is a means of giving that person grace and it would contribute to their salvation if like they're in a possession or something and then you help free them from that. Like if they'd been baptized before, then it's like, okay, you're helping them to now continue to live in that grace, um, and leave the like attachments they have to the devil or like this oppression the devil has on them. Or then now they can be finally baptized if now they're open to it. I don't know. That's a whole other topic. Oh my gosh, possession and the devil, that's a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
clearly, like, yeah, that's a very obvious means of like helping someone, giving them grace. But yeah, I think a lot of people, I didn't realize that it's considered a sacramental.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, because obviously it's not a sacrament, exorcism.
yeah. Hmm.
Yes. So yeah, I don't know if there's any other, what were the other topics we were looking at?
I know a lot of people are talking about mortal and venial sins. I just wanted to be able
Oh,
to talk to my pastors first. It was funny because my pastors listen to our podcast, which is like hilarious to me that I like anyways. But so I was like, "Oh, I would like want to talk to you guys about this topic because I'm just very unfamiliar with the Lutheran view of like mortal and venial sins." And they were like, "Yes. Yes, we'll talk to you about it." So, that can definitely be a future episode. I think it would just take a little more preparation, at least for me, before
no,
we could do
I
that.
I understand it, I think, but the way to communicate it well, I think I would need more time with.
Yeah.
And it's even a hard one for me as a Catholic to wrap my head around sometimes. Yeah, I think that's one that one has a lot of misconceptions around it too. So yeah,
Hmm. So
that's
if
a
you're
tough
like,
one.
come on, do that episode, we're
We
working on
will.
it.
We're
I
working
just
on
want to do it
it.
well. We can't just run into it and then say a bunch of stuff that we regret. That would be
No,
not good.
no.
So yeah,
I
that
think
one definitely in the works, but not soon.
Yeah. I think one that actually would be good for us to maybe do next are guardian angels and praying to angels or
Oh
like priestly
yeah.
celibacy. I think those are two that we could have coming up soon.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the angel one could be really fun. I remember there was even I don't think it was maybe a full video or maybe it was just like a passing comment in the video that Dr. Gavin Ortland made where he was talking about one night he was putting his kids to bed and he would pray with them before bed and he just kind of offhandedly prayed like and like God like send your angels to protect them and now every
Oh,
night they're like angels are protecting us or whatever
that's
and I
so
was like that's
cute.
so I started doing that with Cece but yeah
Oh,
that I think that could be a really interesting
yeah.
topic.
Yeah, to talk about where we agree and disagree too there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let us know if you have any other ideas. But until then, keep talking about it.